M. The Media Project. With fast-moving and sweeping changes to our economy in the works, we all need to reconsider how our investments are best placed. At Partners in Housing, we believe your money is best placed locally, utilized to increase value and provide stable and desirable housing to your neighbors. Contact Partners in Housing to find out how you can participate in local housing opportunities by joining the Partners in Housing Fund. Look us up at partnersinhousingvt.com or email us at partnersinhousingvt@gmail.com.
And hello, welcome. This is Ryan Munn with Entertain Live and recording here with Scott Graves for the Are We Here Yet podcast. How you doing, Scott?
I am having a wonderful evening and I am excited. I am excited to be here with our next guest.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so Scott's here from Rutland, Vermont on the west side of Vermont. I'm over in White River Junction on the east side of Vermont here. And today with us, we have a special guest, Ron Rivers, a committed person to imagining alternatives and leveraging technology to maximize impact. He's a very impact-oriented entrepreneur who is also the founder of Spirit DAO, to our knowledge, still the first and only official 501c3 DAO, that's decentralized autonomous organization. Also the writer of a book, author of Self-Actualization in the Age of Crisis, and a co-founding member of, co-founding member of Spirit DAO. So thank you for being with us here today, Ron. Really appreciate your time and the work that you've been doing. How you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you for asking, Ryan and Scott. Ryan and Scott, both thank you for having me on. It's a genuine pleasure, and I'm really excited to dive in with both of you today.
Excellent. So I just want to kick it off a little bit, just from your profile. There's a lot of things to touch on, so I'm going to give you the reins to give our listeners a little bit more background of kind of where you've come from and where you're at today.
Yeah, perfect. So I've had a fairly eclectic journey. So in my early 20s, I founded a Web2 company in the beer and winemaking space. It was like a $30,000 investment. My buddy and I, bootstrapped, turned into a $6 million business, ended up getting acquired. So it was about 8 years. During that time, I got heavily involved in local organizing and activism. So around like climate issues, I was instrumental in getting New Jersey's $15 minimum wage passed in 2018. So I got like really involved in just like local organizing, local impact at a community kind of municipal level. I served as an executive director for a civic technology nonprofit called Our Society, where we built the first free contest platform for municipal contests, municipal elections. So a way to focus on really increasing access to an agency within the municipal government's process. It was a really successful pilot. But learned some valuable lessons about local politicians in the process. And so from there, took a brief stint as started as a marketing gig, ended up being like a fractional COO gig for a few years for a multi-step ophthalmology practice. Spent some time fundraising for a few years for a company called Resilia for like capacity building for nonprofits. And most recently, over the past year and a half, professionally, I've been involved with AI for social impact organizations with Nonprofit Navigator. We're trying to kind of operationalize AI for what we call public goods. How do we build layers of infrastructure that don't have extractive layers, and kind of think about that as a strategy for growth, as opposed to fitting AI into our single market map model of the good. To your point, you had mentioned during my stemming from really my organizing and activism kind of path, I got deeply into just theories of change and kind of how change takes place within the institutions that we're surrounded by. In many ways, I think the institutions that we are given to kind of be our vehicles of change resist it by design. So how do we kind of create a more transformative world to kind of keep pace when everything around us tries to deny that? Got deeply involved with the philosopher Roberto Unger. And so I spent about 6 years writing Self-Actualization in the Age of Crisis, which is a framework of meaning and value frameworks informed by cosmology and physics, essentially a framework for a non-religion religion. So how do we kind of bind our spirituality and our grounding in the world in nature as it is, as opposed to what our inherited dogmas tell us it must be. So I found it kind of, after I published the book, went on a speaking tour, did a bunch of conferences, lectured at a few universities. And the Spirit DAO community has kind of been slowly growing since that. And we are the first, I don't know if they're the first, you mentioned, right? I don't know if we're the first 501c3 DAO. We're definitely the first 501c3 church DAO. So we're a church. Spirit DAO is a church of temporal naturalism. The church providing specific advantages when it comes to capital as it comes to a nonprofit. And we have a text for the viewers. Everyone should know I haven't made a penny off the book. I actually donated the book to the nonprofit. So when we published at work, the nonprofit owns it. They've actually collectively the DAO has collectively edited a chapter already. That was the intent, to kind of have it co-evolve alongside its community. And right now we're in a transitory phase where, Ryan, you especially, I know, being so deep in the Web3 space, Web3 like UX is poor, and that's like a nice way of saying it. Even as like someone who's a technologist by trade, it's annoying. So we're kind of right now, we're in this, like, we did our proof of concept. We had a really successful 2024. We met over 100 times. We did a retreat. We produced a graphic novel. And now we're kind of in this transitory phase where we're building the first like mobile app for like decentralized community management. So how do you make this stuff really easy? How do you abstract away all the smart contracts into just like passkeys on your phone? So that's kind of the big effort we're primarily doing now. So that is a long answer to your short question, but that's a brief about me.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool. And I believe I came across you. We first met when I somehow got invited to a webinar about Nonprofit Navigator.
Yeah, that might have been it. I made it from LinkedIn. Yeah, I didn't know if that's funny. I didn't know if you had hit that for like a different app, but yeah, I'm glad that's how we first got connected. And yes, I do recall that.
Absolutely. So just curious, it's a bit of a side note, but because I know it's all interconnected and it's part of your building things for impact, just a little bit about Nonprofit Navigator, about how, sort of as AI's kind of hit the ground running, if you will, over the past couple of years and what you have put out into the world with that.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So Nonprofit Navigator is an attempt to operationalize AI for social impact organizations. If you guys have ever connected with like nonprofits or the philanthropic sector, it is relatively a low tech space. And the historical kind of narrative has been like, we'll just kind of outsource. We'll just kind of like throw money at that problem. There's tech and, yeah, we need it, but we'll just pay someone to do it. And what Nonprofit Navigator is essentially is like a layer 2, like a AI, you can build it on top of anything. I think right now it's operating on Gemini, but the idea is like, how do we just build operational infrastructure for nonprofits where they can just like upload a PDF and say like, we are an animal rescue shelter. We want to apply for this grant. And the Nonprofit Navigator will give them like a 4-page grant report. Like it turns hours of their labor into minutes. And it's the same thing. We do that with like needs assessments. We're stemming it's like financial. So the question is, how do we operationalize AI for social impact organizations in a way that's like super intuitive to use? So that's been what we're doing. We also have a partner with the Austin Housing Coalition where we built the first AI for affordable housing access. So we're working with a suite of developers in Austin, Texas, who kind of feed their information through our portal. We build like a backend software to synthesize all the, like everyone has different reports. So it synthesizes all the data into like a readable CSV for the AI. And then the AI can communicate with people in natural language over like 20 different data points about what they specifically need and their specific requirements, their max income, the vouchers they need, etc. And then immediately like call them to action to apply. And the problem we're trying to solve is that in Austin, Texas, there is a lot of affordable housing vacancies. So despite having affordable housing users and having homelessness problems, it's like there's a gap in like the actual access to that information. So we believe that like a mobile first AI where you can just like talk to, like literally with your voice, talk to it. Is a suggestion to kind of close that gap in a way that kind of meets people where they are. And I think that's a core challenge a lot with like nonprofit tech, is it doesn't typically meet people where they are. It's kind of like abstract, and certain people can use it and others can't. So we're trying to kind of reverse that around.
Ron, two questions about using artificial intelligence as a tool in the grant application space. One is, for those of us that have some familiarity with that, grant writing, right? Different kind of writing than, say, fictional writing, creative writing in general, right? Does our current understanding of and the current capacity of most artificial intelligence technologies as they are lend themselves better to the kind of, shall we say, focused writing of grant writing, as opposed to the creative? We've experimented here in our media partnership, Ryan and our third cohort, Will and I, on using artificial intelligence from everything from songwriting, not lyrics, mind you, but the actual music itself, to compare with my organic writing and the written word. And it's still pretty. I'm not worried yet. You see what I'm saying? So, but in the grant writing space, what does that look like?
It's a great question. So it's not surprising to me, Scott, that like it's not going to get music or songwriting, because that is ultimately, like, when we think about our power, right? Like my philosophy of AI is pretty straightforward, right? Anything that is repetitive, we should put into code, right? We should be doing the imaginal. So like music being so at the root of the imaginal, I don't think AI is there now, certainly. And it may be some time. It may be some real like.
And then we have the spare time as human beings, right? To focus on that which is humanistic, that which is the most. We create bionic workers, right? Get the mundacity out of the work that we're doing, right?
Yeah, well said. Because ultimately, we are most alive, right? Most God, like when we're doing that creative work, when we're bringing that newness into the world. So yeah, with grant writing, so it's trained on a ton of, like, we have a nonprofit navigators organized as a co-op. So we have like a team of people with a century of social impact experience. So we trained it on a ton of like successful grant applications. We trained it on like a framing. I think grant applications are different than like pure creative, like music, or let's even say creative writing, because there is a structure. There are clear things you must articulate to the funder. And you have to do it in a way. And even I would say, like, we started building Nonprofit Navigator like about a year ago. And as you guys are, I'm sure, aware, right? The transformation from AI a year ago to today is mind blowing, right? So it's the most recent release, it was like 4 or 5. Some of the things it writes are poetic. It's like really like it's kind of profound in a way that I feel like the previous models even a month ago weren't doing. Yeah. So it is a fascinating thing. I think the concern from our end, one thing we really focus on is like really making sure the AI is like kind of writing like a more common natural language, because I feel like there is an apprehension in the social impact space, and it's changing. But when AI was like a year ago, some people, like some funders, were like, "Don't write, don't use AI." It's like they want like it's many ways it's this kind of like veiled power maintenance in my.
Well, that gets to the second half of my question, which is as if artificial intelligence proliferates in the grant writing space, then if I'm a funder, how do I begin to differentiate? You might say, lest I anticipate my the interview answers, well, I mean, but the inputs are all different, right? The different organizations are going to put different inputs. But then it's because AI is this aggregate tool, right? It still has a tendency. It's going to be trying to narrow down to a certain thing, right? Or maybe I don't understand it enough. I mean, let me simplify the question. It's just how do we effectively use it, but allow for a space where funders can truly differentiate between applications?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think at the root of your question is like a desire for the funders to like kind of hold on to some sort of monicum of like, this is legit and this is not, right? This is good and this is bad. But in reality, like, my opinion of philanthropy is funders should be giving away way more money. Like it's not enough to sit on these, you're going to give away 6% of your dowry so you have an indefinite life supply. It's like, we need solutions now. We are facing unprecedented crises on all sides. So I'm less concerned with like, ultimately what the funder needs to do is evaluate, is this program in alignment with our values and our vision? Like we've said that we want to support these things. This program is giving us this data, right? If it's legitimate and they can reference, which they typically do with on-site visits, etc., it should be less of a concern of where it's coming from. And the only, right, if we were to say like the plausible solution that like some are implementing today is like, oh, you get anti-AI, so like AI that reads if the text is AI, right? But that's like an arms race. It doesn't end. You're constantly, so you're just going to end up paying for a service that's perpetually you're going to have to pay for. It's just like, in my opinion, it's the wrong way to think about this.
Driven by data. Driven by technology. Driven by community development. Driven by the need to get results for your project. SM Graves Associates, delivering real estate development to you, including project management and pre-development services with a keen focus on delivering community-oriented projects. We build profitable projects that respond to the needs of your neighborhood. Join the SMG family. Find us at smgravesassociates.com.
What should be the right way is a deep embrace and encouragement, because most nonprofits in the United States are under-resourced, understaffed, right? They're just they're spinning as many places as they can with as few people.
Well, and I'd say that's a cultural issue too, because we purposely do that. I having been an executive director of several different types of nonprofits myself, including those where, as we garnered more money, as we really turned things around financially, many of the board members were concerned that, well, if we're not struggling, people won't give us money after a while, which is like, just because we're a nonprofit doesn't mean that people don't continue to want to. It's just like the for-profit space in that people want to back winning horses. When they see a properly managed organization that's actually able to execute on its priorities, they want to be a part of that. When they see a shit show, they're like, I don't know that my money's going to be well spent there. You know what I mean? I want to dig in, though. You said something that I found a little provocative in a good way. And that is, this general philosophy sort of, with all the critical, I'm going to use the word critical ecosystem problems at huge scale, right? A housing crisis that's unprecedented and international, an economic crisis, an inequality crisis that is creating all of these other social ills internationally. The scale of what we're talking about, right? You're saying we don't, I want you to answer the question and not me put words in your mouth. Is it a problem of scale? Is it a problem of distribution across all different types of nonprofits? I heard in what you say, maybe that you're suggesting we simply just need to give out more money faster to yet more nonprofits and see where it lies. Who succeeds, who's better at it than others. What are you getting at with that statement?
Well, I feel like your question pulled on several threads. So let's start with the second part, which is the nonprofit part. But then your precursor question, I think, is pointing to a larger issue. The perspective of nonprofits is basically most nonprofits in the United States are doing like grassroots community work. Most nonprofits in the United States have like 1 to 3 employees, right? There are people in the community who are like, just the community needs help. They need an after-school program, right? We have a lot of animals. We need a neuter and spay program, whatever the case may be. So in that context, these are people who are typically not high-tech individuals. They're juggling a lot of places. They might be doing this work for free. So when I talk about giving more money, that's exactly what I mean. It's like we don't need, in my opinion, philanthropy to be the gatekeeper, the arbiter of the good, because let's be candid, right? Like a lot of philanthropic gains are ill-gotten, right? If we think about the context of societal well-being. So and I'll give you a true story. So I was at a conference about 2 years ago, and I was at the millennial, I was in like the millennial breakout, right? And it was depressing because I cannot tell you how many kids, I shouldn't say kids, I'm a millennial, but I can't tell you how many individuals. Grandpa made me the executive director of this $20 million endowment, and we're going to give away 5%, the absolute minimum we can give every year. So this is just my job for the rest of my life. It's like that kind of lack of vision that is frankly inherited, right? Because that's like the nature of philanthropy, is this kind of, a vehicle for wealth transfer and I should say wealth transfer, but wealth maintenance and preservation over time. So that, I am of the philosophy that yes, like the money needs to be spent and there are going to be failures, right? There's going to be things that don't work out, but it's no different than venture capital, right? Like we're willing, if someone's,
when you said it, that's what I had in the back of my head is like, we have no problem with 9 out of 10 businesses we pour millions into utterly failing to get to that one multi-billion-dollar, winner. So like, why don't we do that in service organizations that is to say providing service?
Yes,
service
well,
directly to people.
Just being willing to like make that trust. I think the challenges, of course, is it's, we've been so conditioned, all of us, I say we as a collective, all of us have been born in these systems, right? We've inherited these institutions well before we were born, right? They've been in motion for some time. So it's this like single market maximalism that's just like ingrained in us, where it's like, oh, if it's not 10x, like we don't want to talk about it. So it's the kind of same thing. But you had mentioned, Scott, previously, I want to kind of pull out the meta crisis, poly crisis, whatever we want to call it, right? You had a different language for it. But I would make the argument that at the root of it, and this is kind of into the spirit realm, is our available frameworks of meaning and value. We have been deeply conditioned to hierarchical frameworks of meaning and value. We've inherited from our parents, who inherited from theirs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The people constructing the institutions governing our lives, right? In many ways, we have given power to our creations over us. We've created these things, and we've absolved power. We said govern us, but they don't deserve that power, right? They can never be enough for us. And that's kind of the core conflict today, is you have a system of regimes and thought that was frankly originated thousands of years ago, right? To meet a radically different human time experience. And today we struggle to kind of meet the needs of the moment because, I mentioned our vehicles of change earlier, like being, designed to resist it. But like, let's take U.S. democracy or U.S. government, right? It's difficult to call it democracy. It's not really democracy, but especially today, it's difficult to see what it's. It's not difficult. It's got a clear trajectory. But my point being is like, it's designed to create impasse, right? The U.S. government is slow by design. Now that made sense when you had to have couriers who would have to take a horse and deliver a message, right, to a different place. So it made sense that you wouldn't want the rapid, evolution. I'd make the argument that today we want a much deeper, more fiery democracy, much more rapid, much more, iterative in its process. But you can't do that under a two-house institution, right, where you have one of those institutions, right, the Senate, whose entire purpose is to protect the interests of the wealthy landholders. What it was and what it is, right? So how do you have how do you kind of create transformation from within a system that, again, is designed to resist it? This is how I even got into the book and the spiritual alternative, because I'm convinced it cannot come from within. And I think there's no, like now in this moment with agentic AI on the horizon, there's no better time to start thinking about, like, how do we build the alternative? I'm not saying burn it down, although.
Look, you're talking about agency, right? And
we talk
about that all this stuff. When I've been speaking is what it really comes down to, whether I'm in a Web3 audience or I'm in a more traditional audience, is participation, right? Is how do we get everyone participating? But you also very quietly let slip something a little earlier about this technology allowing the technologies to do the mundane and us to be more godlike. And on its surface, typically I'm anti-religious in many ways, though I'm agnostic. But I love that concept because it's not about an individual being more godlike. It's about we as people individually and collectively being more godlike together and enabled through the agency of technology in a whole different paradigm that can exist today that is completely different from anything our current institutions have been built on. So I hope that leads into a little bit of how you can share your vision for transformation and what Spirit now is doing.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So I think that's a great thread, Ryan, because obviously once you start mentioning things like God or religion, it's a sensitive. So I'm going to give you a very high level brief of like, what is temporal naturalism? That's the philosophy that Spirit does. Spirit does a church of temporal naturalism. Temporal naturalism is grounded in the works of the physicist Lee Smolin, the philosopher Roberto Mangabeira Unger, who's presently at Cambridge, at Harvard, and myself. I've written a book and a graphic novel in the same vein. And temporal naturalism is essentially that the fundamental ontologies of reality are relation and change. Okay, change being time. We define time, temporal, as the universe's capacity for change, right? The transformation of transformation. So in the book, I make the following arguments. The material nature of reality, physics and cosmology, as in present day, continuously point to it being infinite, right? That physical nature of reality is in fact quantum. It is this infinite transformation. We know from our observations of the universe that nothing in the history of the universe has ever not been changing. So change is the kind of perpetual through all of our observations in all points in human history and awareness. So to that context, I make the argument that there's two observable infinities in the world. There's the universe itself and human imagination. And they're both infinite because they're recursive, and they can only be defined by themselves. That is to say that like there's a just so-ness about the universe. Like it doesn't conform to any model. That's like my core, there's like theories of everything. The problem with that is like nothing about our history would point to there being a theory of everything. Everything is always changing. Novelty is central to the universe, the emergence of the new, right? So the argument I would make in terms of the godlike comment is like human beings are most alive, like when we're in that flow state, right? When the work is effortless and we can spend 10 hours doing a thing and it's play. That is our most, so when I say most godlike, I mean, we're most aligned. We're aligning those observable things. Our imagination is being made real in real time toward the direction of our ideal, right? So from there, we redefine self. I make the argument that self in a relational universe, such as ours, governed by time and change, I make the argument that self-actualization has to be defined as the concept of individual actualization, which is the development of I, and systemic actualization, the development of we, because our moral and material interests are inseparable. The most important event in any person's life today still is their birth lottery, where they're born and who they're born to, right? Our rights are perpetually bound to the geography that we inherit or that we were born into. And even then, in the present climate of, brown shirts and kidnapping.
But for the first time in a century and a half, that's being called into question.
Yeah.
Since 1898, the post-Chinese Exclusion Act, Supreme Court. Keep going. I forget the name of the.
No, it's okay. So the argument is like we have individual actualization, systemic actualization, and what temporal naturalism is unique in a spiritual religious context. Because there's nothing to believe. Like the universe changing and time, like it doesn't need you to believe it for it to be accurate, right? That's like all of our observations. So if we're going to enjoy what I call a nature-oriented religion, it has to be grounded in our observations, right? So, and I won't get into. I do make an argument, an academic argument, for points of failure of the monotheistic religions or the Eastern religions, and like where the conflict is. But the point being is, from there we develop a suite of core values. Like kind of how do you like if your focus and energy is an act of becoming, right? Or as Dr. Ian McGilchrist would write, like, attention is a moral act. Like if that is an accurate statement of the nature of reality, then how do we most well equip individuals to embody that? We develop this framework of core values. The acronym is Reframe Courage. I'll go high level: relation, equity, flexibility, restraint, awareness, minimalism, enthusiasm, and courage. And from there, we make the argument that if you genuinely embody these values, it creates a restlessness in you, right? You have to act. It's not enough to just sit back. It's not enough to be non-attached. you have to set yourself on fire. So from there, we have this suite of systemic rights we call the 8 dignities. So this is at the heart of Spirit DAO and the Church of Temporal Naturalism, and why the DAO structure and the decentralized structure for like financial management, etc., was so necessary. Is we are working towards how do we further not only the belief and desire and demand for a suite of global public works, but also like the economic engines to kind of build that is we believe the 8 dignities is a path to unbinding our rights from the state. So how do you unbind your rights from the state? So because ultimately, and I say this as like a dad, right? I have a 4.5-year-old. A baby born in Gaza, born in Africa, born in China, the US, South America, etc. They're all tongue-tied prophets, right? They're all immensely valuable, immensely divine, but because of the randomness of birth, right? They're kind of set on a trajectory, and we have to say no. That's not enough. That's not acceptable in an era of abundance and intelligence as the present one we inhabit.
Find Innovato 2 on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and subscribe to Interchain Live on YouTube for video podcasts. Innovato 2 is a collaboration of Interchain Live and M the Media Project.